Sure. Here's a compelling introduction to your YouTube video story. The classroom was silent, except for the faint scratching of pencils on paper. It was one of those days, grey skies outside, the air thick with the kind of quiet tension that made time drag. At the front of the room, Mr. Anderson, the strictest teacher in the school, paced back and forth, his sharp eyes scanning the students like a hawk searching for its next prey. And then, his gaze landed on Liam. Liam sat hunched over his desk, his uniform slightly wrinkled, his shoes scuffed, and his notebook filled with second-hand pages, some torn, some taped back together. He wasn't like the other kids, and everyone knew it. His family struggled to make ends meet, and unlike his classmates, he couldn't afford the latest gadgets, expensive clothes, or even a proper lunch some days. But what he lacked in wealth, he made up for in intelligence and determination. "All right, class," Mr. Anderson said, his voice cutting through the silence. "It's time for the math quiz. No calculators, no excuses, just your brain power." Liam gulped. He was good at math. Better than most, in fact. Numbers made sense to him in a way that life didn't. He picked up his pencil, ready to prove himself. But just as he started writing, a sharp voice interrupted. "You there, Liam?" Mr. Anderson called out, an amused smirk playing on his lips. "Do you even have a pencil that works?" A few students chuckled. Liam felt his face burn, but he nodded and held up his pencil, short, worn, and barely held together with a bit of tape. "Of course," Mr. Anderson muttered. "And tell me, Liam, do you think you'll ever be able to afford a real education? A future? Or are you just wasting your time here?" The room fell silent. The words hit Liam harder than he expected. He clenched his fists under the desk, his heart pounding. He wanted to say something, but what could he say? It wasn't the first time Mr. Anderson had humiliated him, and it wouldn't be the last. But before anyone could react, the door to the classroom creaked open. A hush fell over the room as a tall figure stepped inside, a man in a sleek suit, his presence commanding, yet effortless. Some students gasped, others whispered in disbelief. Even Mr. Anderson, usually so smug and composed, seemed to falter for a moment. It was him, Elon Musk. The air in the room shifted, the tension turning into pure shock. What was he doing here? Why had he just walked into their classroom? And most importantly, had he heard what Mr. Anderson had just said? Liam's eyes widened as Elon Musk's gaze swept the room, finally settling on him. And then he spoke. "Did I hear that right?" The classroom remained frozen in silence. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. Mr. Anderson's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a nervous tightness in his jaw. The students exchanged glances, their eyes wide with shock. Liam, still gripping his pencil, felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Had he really heard that right? Elon Musk, the billionaire, the genius behind Tesla and SpaceX, was standing in their classroom, and he had just questioned Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the room. "Ah, Mr. Musk," he stammered, forcing a smile. "This is, quite unexpected. What brings you here today?" Elon didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his gaze still locked onto Liam. There was something unreadable in his expression, a mixture of curiosity and something else, something like disappointment. "I asked a question," Elon said finally, his voice calm but firm. "Did I hear that right? You just told this student he wouldn't amount to anything?" A few students gasped. No one had ever spoken to Mr. Anderson like that before. Liam swallowed hard. not sure whether to feel relieved or more nervous than ever. Mr. Anderson let out a forced chuckle. Oh, that was just a little tough. Love. You know, some students need a push to do better. Liam held the business card tightly, his fingers pressing into the edges, as if he were afraid it might disappear. His heart was racing, his mind spinning with thoughts he had never dared to entertain before. A real opportunity, a chance to prove himself. But was this real? Was he dreaming? The room was still tense, the weight of Elon Musk's words lingering in the air. Mr. Anderson's face had turned red, his usual arrogance shaken. The students were whispering among themselves, exchanging glances filled with disbelief and excitement. It wasn't every day that someone like Elon Musk walked into their classroom and turned everything upside down. Mr. Anderson forced out a chuckle, but it lacked the confidence he usually carried. With all due respect, Mr. Musk, one conversation doesn't change reality. Most kids don't make it, no matter how smart they think they are. Elon looked at him, his expression unreadable. Then he turned back to Liam. The only limits that exist are the ones people like him make you believe in, he said. If you want something, you go after it. You work harder, you think differently, and you prove them wrong. Liam swallowed hard. He had spent years hearing the opposite, being told that his circumstances defined him, that he would never be more than just another struggling student. But now, someone who had built rockets, electric cars, and changed the world was telling him otherwise. Elon straightened, glancing around the classroom one last time. I came here today to see how education is shaping the future, he said. And what I see is a system that rewards privilege and discourages potential. That's not how the world moves forward. With that, he turned to leave, but before he stepped through the door, he looked back at Liam. I meant what I said. The offer stands, but you have to believe in yourself first. And then he was gone. For a moment, the room remained eerily quiet. Liam stared at the card in his hand, his mind racing. Was this really happening? Could he actually have a future beyond this classroom, beyond the small life he had always thought was his only path? Mr. Anderson scoffed and turned back to the board, trying to pretend none of it had happened. All right, enough distractions, he muttered. Back to the quiz. No, Liam said suddenly. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Heads turned. Even Mr. Anderson looked stunned. Liam slowly stood up, gripping the business card. His voice was steady, his chest rising and falling with a new kind of confidence he hadn't felt before. You're wrong, he said, looking Mr. Anderson straight in the eye. I'm not nothing, and I won't let you or anyone else decide what I can or can't be. The classroom erupted. Some students cheered, others clapped, and even the ones who usually stayed quiet looked at Liam with something close to admiration. Mr. Anderson opened his mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. For the first time, he had no control over the room. Liam sat back down, his heart still pounding, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, something new. Hope, and for the first time in his life, he believed that maybe, just maybe, he was meant for something greater. Elon's eyes narrowed slightly. A push? He repeated. By humiliating them. The air in the room grew heavier. Mr. Anderson opened his mouth to respond, but Elon didn't let him. I used to get in trouble in school. Elon continued, shifting his focus to the students. I was bullied. I was underestimated. People thought I was just a weird kid with crazy ideas. But do you know what made the difference? The students leaned in, hanging on to his every word. I had people who believed in me, he said simply. People who encourage me to think differently, to dream big. Not people who tore me down. Liam's fingers tightened around his pencil. Something in his chest ached. Something that had been buried under years of being treated like he didn't matter. Mr. Anderson scoffed, folding his arms. With all due respect, Mr. Musk, not everyone is destined to be a billionaire. Some kids just don't have what it takes. The words hit the air, like a slap. The entire class fell into stunned silence again. Elon didn't react at first. He simply studied Mr. Anderson for a long moment, as if trying to understand what kind of person could say something like that. Then, he turned back to Liam. "What's your name?" Liam hesitated. Liam, he said quietly. Elon nodded. "Liam, tell me something. What do you want to do? What's your dream?" Liam blinked. No one had ever asked him that before. He had spent so much of his life just trying to get through the day, trying not to be noticed, that he had never really thought about it. He hesitated, feeling the weight of all the eyes on him. "I like building things. I like solving problems." Elon smiled slightly. "Engineering then." Liam gave a small nod. "Maybe, but I don't think I'll ever get the chance." "Why not?" Liam swallowed. He felt the familiar shame creeping up, the one that came with knowing he couldn't afford the same opportunities as his classmates. "It's expensive," he admitted. "College, books, everything. And even if I got there, people like Mr. Anderson don't think I belong." Elon's expression hardened. He turned back to Mr. Anderson. "Do you know what I see when I look at Liam?" he asked. Mr. Anderson didn't respond. "I see someone who could change the world," Elon continued. "Someone who just needs the right opportunity. Not everyone is born with wealth, but intelligence, creativity, and determination. Those things don't come from money." The class was completely silent, but something was shifting in the room. Liam felt it. Elon turned back to him. "Do you want a chance, Liam?" Liam hesitated. "What do you mean?" Elon reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on Liam's desk. "There's a program for students like you, kids, who think outside the box. It's competitive, but if you're willing to work for it, I'll make sure you get a shot." Liam stared at the card. His hands trembled as he picked it up. Mr. Anderson laughed dryly. "You're giving him false hope. There are thousands of kids like him. He's nothing special." Elon's gaze snapped back to him, and for the first time, there was real fire in his eyes. "That's where you're wrong," he said. "Every great innovator, every world changer, started as a kid that someone underestimated, and I don't bet against kids like that." Liam's heart pounded. He had spent his whole life believing he wasn't good enough. But maybe he had been wrong, and maybe, for the first time, his life was about to change.